I know a little secret then. There may be a new blue zone coming up that is going to be discovered. What can you say about that? If it's just between me and you, nobody else is listening.
I know, just between me and you.
Hey everybody and welcome to the Lounge Podcast, LoungePodden as it's called in Swedish. If you're new to this podcast, which you probably are if you are not from Sweden or the Nordic countries, this is a podcast where I invite mostly Swedish and Nordic experts on different subjects, journalists, scientists, artists, athletes, entrepreneurs, and sometimes I invite really interesting people internationally, and this is one of those times. Dan Buettner is the founder of Blue Zones project and the writer of all of the Blue Zones books, and of course he's a public speaker, he's an explorer, he's a writer, he is a journalist, and he honored us in talking about the Blue Zones today, and I wanted to talk a little bit more about the Blue Zones project. So Dan Buettner and his team of around 200 people who are trying to implement the lifestyle of the people in the Blue Zones directly in the United States. And they have tried in 50 different spots in the United States and all have had positive results, and he talks about what those results are. I really enjoyed this talk and having Dan on. One more thing before we kick this off: if you're a new international listener, we will have more international guests in the future. Some are even booked for this spring, so make sure to subscribe to this podcast. And if you like the old international episodes and also this with Dan Buettner, you're of course welcome to support us on Patreon. The link is in this podcast description and it is patreon.com/Taimaz. Thank you for listening, thank you for tuning in. Now it's time to kick this off. Here he comes, the great Dan Buettner, the Blue Zones. Let's go. And thank you to Sam, your colleague that set this up. He also told me that you are going around all of the states right now. And what are you up to?
It's another National Geographic assignment. So the standard American diet is known for its toxicity, making people sick. But I have a theory that if you go back about 150 years to the ethnic diets of America, we'll find something considerably healthier. And indeed, that's the case. So I'm trying to capture Blue Zone diets among the food traditions, the old food traditions of America, and redefine a standard American diet in a way that it could actually make people live longer, better, as opposed to give them diabetes and make them fat, which is the way we're eating right now.
What is the life expectancy in the States at the moment?
For women, it's about 81, and for men, it's about 77.
And you have more than 200 people working for Blue Zones at the moment, if I'm correct. And you're out exploring the world, you're writing books, public speaking all over the world. And I'm, of course, very interested in knowing how a regular day in Dan Buettner's life looks like.
Well, it's slowed down considerably because of COVID. Right now, I'm mostly doing research for this book, and I cook my own food, whole plant-based food. I'm a big fan of beans, and I get about 3 hours of gentle, fun physical activity every day. I take a nap, and I read extensively, and I give free range to my proclivities of socializing. So every night I seem to connect with people at a safe social distance, of course, or safe physical distance.
And I know that you're a vegan now, but were you vegan before you started, looking into Blue Zones?
I eat a Blue Zones diet, which is to say I eat mostly whole food plant-based diet. I wouldn't call myself a vegan, but I don't eat meat. It's very rare that I'll eat any animal product. I mean, I'm not militant about it, but I do believe the route to both a healthier world and a healthier body is through eating whole plant-based foods like beans, grains, nuts, greens, and fruits that you like.
And I have so many questions about this diet because you have written a really good book on Blue Zone's Kitchen, it's called. Actually, the cover is so beautiful, so congratulations on just the cover. I started reading up on it at the moment, so it's going to be really interesting.
Thank you.
Of course, you are an author, science journalist, explorer. You could almost say you're an anthropologist as well, right? And a superstar, like international speaker. Also, you have a cyclist career background. You are basically the reason why the Soviet Union collapsed, I've heard.
I did bicycle across the Soviet Union in 1990, and it collapsed 6 months later, but I'd like to say it wasn't my fault.
But have you always loved doing exploring? And I know that your father has meant a lot in the exploring part of your life.
Yeah, my father, Roger Buettner, when other American dads take their kids to Disney World, my dad was taking us out into the wilderness for weeks at a time. So he taught me self-sufficiency and a certain reverence for nature. And that's carried through my adult life. I'm essentially an explorer for National Geographic. But I'm a big believer that if you want to be a real explorer, you're not just showing off by climbing the top of a mountain or being the great white man who goes into the jungle to meet the natives or whatever. I'm a big believer that the modern age of exploration has to include technology and also emerge with insights that improve the human condition, that add to the body of knowledge, that educate, that somehow make our lives better. Specifically, my gift is I have an ability, it seems, to find traditional people and interact with them in a way that they're willing and in fact, I believe, enjoy sharing their wisdom with me in a way that I can synthesize it scientifically so that other people can learn their lessons.
You can see that in all of your work because you obviously worked for National Geographic, you did this finding and this became very big, you wrote books. But the most inspiring thing in the research when I read upon you is what you do at the moment with the Blå Zones project, if I'm saying that correctly, right?
Right.
With trying to implement the systems and the nudging societies into living like the Blå Zones, because I've had many experts on here. Actually, just a few weeks ago, I had one of Sweden's leading expert in overweight epidemic, and he talked about how hard, almost impossible it is to have a strict diet, go down in weight, and then keeping that for a long, long time, because so many societal structures make an impact in how you live your life. And then when I read up on you and this project, that is one of the most interesting things I've read up on and heard in a long, long time. So that is something I really want to talk about, and also see how we can inspire the Nordic countries here and Sweden, of course. But how did you first identify what came to be called the Blå Zones?
I'd been submitting story ideas for National Geographic for a long time, but it wasn't until I got funding from the National Institutes on Aging to find places where people live statistically longest that National Geographic gave me an assignment. And they gave me a big assignment. It turned out to be a cover story on the secrets of long life. And I struck off it's been 2 years just to find these areas: Sardinia, Italy; Okinawa, Japan; Nicoya Peninsula of Costa Rica; Ikaria, Greece; and among the Seventh-day Adventists. These are the areas, Blå Zones, where people live the longest. And it was in the course of doing that story, I met Dr. Gianni Pest, who was using the term Blå Zones for an area in the highlands of Sardinia. He was referring to the profusion of centenarians there, which he was marking with a blue pen. And I said, aha, now there's a good name. And I extended it to all statistically longest lived areas. Then what about the idea of reverse engineering longevity? So if we know in these places people are reaching a healthy age, 95 or 100, largely without chronic disease, without diabetes, many types of cancers, heart disease, even dramatically lower rates of dementia. And you also know that it's not because they have superior genes. They have the same genes that you and I have. So it must be something about their internal or external lives. And so I spent better part of a decade trying to unravel what's going on in these Blå Zones that explains this extraordinary longevity. And I emerged with what I think is a fairly elegant solution or an elegant conclusion. And that is, these people have no better responsibility. They don't have greater discipline. They don't have better diet. They don't work harder at exercise. They don't have better focus. The bottom line is they live in environments where the healthy choice is the easy choice. So when they go out to look for food, it's not pizzas and French fries and hamburgers and all the other shit that Americans eat. It's beans and whole grains and minestrone soup and pastas and fruits that grow, because these are the cheapest, most accessible foods. And they have time-honored recipes to make them taste delicious. The most important ingredient in any longevity recipe is taste. People don't, I can tell you that broccoli or tofu is the healthiest food in the world, but if you don't like broccoli and tofu, you're not going to eat it. So the point of the Blue Zone's Kitchen, which is the fourth book in the series, was to identify the culinary genius that makes healthy ingredients taste delicious so people will eat it every day for 95 or 100 years and avoid disease.
Can you just go through like a day in a Blue Zone person's life?
Yes. Well, it's different from Blue Zone to Blue Zone, but what they have in common is they tend to sleep about 8 hours. They tend to wake up and have a big breakfast. They wake up early. It depends where you are. If you're in Okinawa, they're eating vegetable miso soup. If you're in Ikaria, it might be some bread with some honey and some fruit. If you're in Costa Rica, it could be beans and tortillas and a cup of black coffee. But the point is, they're not eating bacon and eggs, and they're not eating sweet cereal like we eat and pouring a bunch of milk on it. They're eating simple, whole food, plant-based. They gather at midday and they have the second biggest meal of the day, usually with the family. They almost always take a nap. They may work a little bit more in the afternoon, but usually by 5 o'clock, they're knocking off, and they take plenty of time to socialize with their neighbors. And they're in bed early, unless, of course, there's a festival, in which case they might stay up all night long. But most nights, they're getting that good sleep. They tend to have a strong sense of purpose, so they're not waking up wondering what they're going to do with their day or what their position is in society. They tend to be religious. Variety of different religions. They tend to put their family first. So instead of putting their career first or their hobby first, their own travel or something, most efforts are focused at family. They keep their aging parents nearby. They invest in their children. These are all important. They're seemingly small, but when applied over a lifetime, they explain longevity beyond a shadow of a doubt.
What I hear from people who think they know the Blue Zones and haven't read up on your work think that 1 or 2 or 3 of these factors can make them, live longer. But it's the summary of all of these things that makes the big difference, as I understand it. Another thing that I've thought about, it's mostly relatively warm zones compared to Sweden, of course. But do you know how much difference that makes?
Your first point about it's the sum of the characteristics. What's important to realize is there's no single magic bullet that's going to help you live longer. It is always silver buckshot or a flurry of nudges and defaults. So people in Blue Zones live a long time because, yes, they're eating a whole food, plant-based diet. They are moving every 20 minutes or so, low-intensity physical activity, not really hard exercise. Because their life is underpinned with purpose, they're surrounded by people who support the right habits, and they live in places where the healthy choice is the easy choice. And it's not so much the individualness of each of those characteristics. It is the mutually supporting web that keep people doing the right things and avoiding the wrong things for long enough so they don't develop a chronic disease. That's the important thing.
I know a little secret then. There may be a new Blue Zone coming up that is going to be discovered. What can you say about that? If it's just between me and you, nobody else is listening.
I know, just between me and you.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's another Blue Zone. We're looking into a few places, but globalization is kind of destroyed. Blue Zones are created when you have the sweet spot of very good public health. In other words, they have vaccinations. They have antibiotics, access to antibiotics. in many cases, they have social workers who are checking up on people before they get heart disease or diabetes. But then they also have this traditional lifestyle. So they're not eating burgers and fries and driving everywhere and sitting on their cell phone all day long. So I don't know. To your point about warm climate, that there's no blue zones in the tropics. They're at about the 20th parallel, and that's kind of a sweet spot too, because they're not dying of infectious diseases like malaria or typhus or cholera because they're far enough north. But they also have the benefit of year-round sunshine and the ability to have a garden year-round. So they're outside more. They're eating more fruits and vegetables and less preserved, pickled, or salted foods. And they have gardens, and that sunshine, vitamin D is so important. The best source of vitamin D in almost everybody's diet is through the sun. You get more vitamin D in a half hour in good sunshine than you do drinking 2 gallons of milk. So people in these blue zones, because they're out in the sun all day long, they get that vitamin D.
Right. And of course you have a lot to do, so we don't have time to go into all of the differences that makes the difference. So you have to read up on Dan's work on your own. But to summarize that part, diet, exercise, downshifting, faith, relationships, and purpose is basically those stuff that you have been talking about, right? Is it something more that I'm missing there?
The important thing, if you want to live longer yourself, is don't try to change your behavior, change your environment. And when I say your environment, I mean beginning with your inside of your head, knowing your sense of purpose, knowing what your values are, your passions, what your strengths are, and an outlet for them. Paying close attention to your circle of 4 or 5 friends. If we know that if your 3 best friends are unhealthy and obese, there's a 150% better chance you're going to be overweight yourself. So you want to make sure your friends' idea of recreation is walking or skiing or gardening, that they care about you on a bad day, that they keep your mind engaged, and that they eat healthy. It's not a bad idea to have a vegan or a vegetarian in your immediate social network, because they're going to push you to eat more plant-based. It's also, I mean, you guys in Sweden do a good job of this already, but living close to work so you can walk or bike to work. That people get more exercise doing that than anybody in America does, thinking they're going to go to the gym, because people don't go to the gym. They might go for a while when they're trying to get in shape to meet a mate, but the general rule is they quit after a couple years. So it doesn't give them any real longevity benefit. Walking to work every day, however, we know lowers your chance of heart disease by about 20%. And then changing your home environment and getting rid of mechanical conveniences. So much as we see in Blue Zone, they're doing their own work by hand, their own yard work, their own kitchen work. They're kneading bread by hand. They're walking upstairs instead of taking elevators everywhere. They don't have a toaster on their counter reminding them to put something unhealthy and to heat it up and eat it. They have a fruit bowl reminding them to eat fruit bowl. So the point is, pay attention to your surroundings and optimize those. You know, I've written 4 Blue Zones books, especially Blue Zone Solution, that tells you exactly how to do this. And if anybody has, anybody listening, if you have any questions, I have a Instagram account, Dan Buettner. If you direct message me, I will answer any questions we weren't able to cover here.
That is something that hit me when I read up on the book, that they don't actually exercise as we know it. It's all of these things that you said. Right. But one thing that hit me, a question is, have you followed up on people who have lived in the Blue Zones but moved out of there, and how their longevity has been affected?
Yes, I did a piece for American TV, the Today Show. We followed a family of Icarian from Icaria, Greece, who moved to America about 2 generations ago. And now there's 80 people in their clan, and they are just as unhealthy as the rest of Americans, which to me proves the fact that it's not their genes, it's not their quote unquote culture, because they maintain their culture, it's their environment. when you take healthy, hardworking people out of a good environment and you put them in a crappy environment like an American typical inner city, their health goes to hell. So the point is, if you want to get people healthier, change their environment. And this is a message for the Swedish government or the Danish government, that you guys do, I would say, a better job at it than most people in America, but keep it up. Keep making it walkable and bikeable. Not a bad idea to tax junk food, because junk food costs a lot of money for our society and in healthcare, and it ought to pay its share, and continue to promote public health. That's what works.
Right. This is directly related to the next question, where we're going to talk about the project, the Blå Zones project, that is the most interesting part. How have you seen the Blå Zone people, these small pockets of societies, their lifestyle, how has that survived for this long?
Largely because they're geographically remote. They live on islands or up in the hills, and society has left them alone. But no, the Blå Zones are disappearing. It's not pessimistic, it's fact. They are, every one of them is, because as they import chips and hamburgers and French fries and pizzas and candy bars and automobiles, their health is following the same trajectory as the American health.
So, to the very interesting thing that you have going on in the United States, is it around 50 cities at the moment that you try with this Blå Zones project? Can you just tell us about that and how it has been going?
So about 10 years ago, I had an idea to manufacture a Blå Zone. And I had this insight that what makes people live longer is not their behavior or discipline or sense of individual responsibility. It was their environment. So I got a big grant from AARP, an American organization. We auditioned cities. We picked Albert Lea, Minnesota, and I brought the best experts in the world who knew how to shape people's environment. And we start with the assumption that people are genetically hardwired to crave fat, sugar, and salt and take rest whenever they can. So we're not going to try to convince individuals to take on a new lifestyle like every other diet or exercise program does. We essentially accept the fact that humans are going to do what their genes tell them to do. So we formed 3 teams: a policy team, a place team, and a people team. The policy team aggregated all the best practices, the best policies around favoring fruits and vegetables over junk food, favoring the pedestrian over the motorist, and favoring the non-smoker over the smoker. And it turns out there's a lot of great ideas. Many of them originate in Scandinavia. And we don't come in telling city government what to do, but we do say, we will give you Blå Zone certification if we can find 20 of these policies and implement them that are effective here and feasible here. And generally, when you hold the consensus and look at each one of these, you can find a couple dozen policies that a city will actually change. And the right way to do it is the conversation. The wrong way to do it is to try to tell people what to do. Our second team administers a Blå Zone certification for restaurants, schools, grocery stores, workplaces, and churches. And those places that are willing to make sure that healthy food is the most available food, that people are nudged into moving more, people are nudged into socializing, and people have the time to pursue their purpose, we give them Blå Zone certification. We usually get about 40% of the buildings Blå Zone certified. And then a third team branches out and hits about 15% of the adult population. And the individuals take a Blå Zone pledge, and they agree to take a health risk assessment. So we know we get a baseline we can measure. They agree to curate their immediate social circle. So they have 4 or 5 healthy friends, and maybe they let go a little bit of their unhealthy friends. And then we take them through a purpose workshop and getting them volunteering. So it's the perfect storm of people, places, and policy. And it's thinking long term, not trying to change people's minds, changing their environment. And In every city it's worked. Our biggest success is Fort Worth, Texas, 1 million people. And in 5 years, we've lowered the obesity rate, lowered the smoking rate, both by single-digit percentages. And by their own calculations, we've saved them about $250 million a year in healthcare costs because so it works and it works well, and it's catching on here, and it's catching on because it takes a different approach than everybody else has taken.
That is, the result is amazing, and of course, as I said, it's really interesting and exciting stuff that you have going on. What has the response been from politicians higher up to try maybe bigger spots?
Well, our government for the last 4 years, I wasn't interested in this sort of this pursuit, but perhaps the forthcoming government. Our new president, I think, is more likely to embrace this approach. And we'll see. I mean, in a way, we had to prove it locally before we can scale it nationally. So I think we're in a good position now.
Have you thought about going outside of the States?
Yeah, I've thought about it, but I don't have marketing. Basically, when somebody calls me, and if they have the political will and they have the funding, I'll go anywhere.
Come to Sweden then. Come to Sweden. So if I ask you this question, where do you start if you want to start this project in Sweden?
Well, it can either be a big city, Stockholm or something like that, the mayor of Stockholm. But, we always get public endorsement and private funding. So, a city, say the size of Stockholm, I would have to hire about 30 or 40 people full time for 5 years. So, you can imagine this is not just a PR thing. It's not just, you can't just wish it and it'll happen. You have to hire and train people, and they work a program 40 hours a week for 5 years. And so you can kind of do the math. I mean, it's expensive, but the payoff is many dozens of times savings in healthcare costs, and people in our cities report higher levels of well-being, and they're more connected, and better economic results ensue. Typically, the value of property goes up too. So because people like to live in a place that's healthy as opposed to unhealthy, so property values go up. But it takes long-term vision. Politicians in America, what they care about is getting elected in the next 2 years or the next 4 years. So they don't have the luxury often of a 5-year vision. So it's hard to do in this country. But we found enlightened leaders in Fort Worth, Texas, and Naples, and Hawaii, and several other cities. So it works, and our day will come.
And 5 years doesn't sound so long to me, but of course in politics that is a lot. But insurance companies, that is basically some industries that could see this as an interesting project to be the trailblazer of.
Yeah, our clients are typically insurance companies or hospital systems or community foundations.
And the last question before I let you go, you're investor in Memphis Meat. So interesting company, so interesting product.
I happen to know the CEO founder, so it was more of a friend investment, but it's ideologically aligned because it's getting people away from killing animals and eating them. They take a animal stem cell in a petri dish or out like in a brewery, and they feed it amino acids. So it grows like muscle grows, animal muscle grows, but it grows in a tank. So it produces meat without producing a sentient being. It doesn't require hormones or pesticides, or doesn't produce carbon dioxide, and Memphis Meat is on a trajectory to replace the meat from dead animals. This is meat grown in a lab. It's the right idea, and I'm a big fan of the In fact, the founder's children went to my children's school, so that's how I met him.
Basically the future, as everything that you do. So thank you very much, Dan. And is there anything else that you want to say before we quit? Otherwise, let's say bye to the audience.
All right. Thank you very much for this honor, and it's nice to connect with Sweden.
Thank you, everybody, and talk to you later. Bye.
Bye. Nice to meet you.
Hey everybody, and thanks for listening to this podcast and Dan Buettner. And we're going to have on more international guests, hopefully even in person in the future when Corona has magically disappeared through vaccination or something else. I don't know, I'm not an expert. We hope to have more international guests. So if you like this, please subscribe to this podcast. And if you really, really like this podcast and you want to support us, of course you international listeners are welcome to support us on Patreon. It's patreon.com/Taimaz, Taimaz. So patreon.com/Taimaz, and you can support us with whatever amount you would like. Thanks for listening, and until next time, take care of yourself. Ciao.